Okay, let's dive into something truly fascinating.
Yeah.
You brought us some sources, articles, research notes about a rumor that's just, well, captivated people for decades. On one side, you have Marilyn Monroe, the ultimate icon of beauty and Hollywood glamour.
Right.
On the other, Albert Einstein, the absolute giant of scientific thought. It seems like an impossible pairing, right?
Almost, yeah.
But there's this persistent whisper, this story, suggesting they weren't just contemporaries, but that just maybe, they knew each other, perhaps even more.
It is an almost irresistible juxtaposition, isn't it? The symbols of two completely different realms, celebrity and profound intellect.
Totally.
And your sources dive right into this, asking, is there any truth at all to that whisper?
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to go through these sources together, unpack everything they tell us, pull out the most important nuggets of insight, and really try to get to the bottom of this captivating story.
Yeah, what do they actually reveal?
What do the sources reveal about the truth behind this enduring myth?
What's fascinating here is how the sources immediately tackle the perceived implausibility head-on, particularly that pervasive stereotype often attached to Marilyn Monroe.
And this is where it gets really interesting right off the bat, because the sources provide compelling evidence that challenges that whole dumb blonde idea.
They really do.
They highlight her personal library, cataloged during the 1999 Christie's auction of her effects. Get this. It contained approximately 430 books.
430, that sheer number is incredibly significant. It speaks volumes about her actual intellectual life.
Wow.
As your sources note, she herself said books were a refuge and a companion. This wasn't just, decoration. It suggests a genuine engagement with reading.
Absolutely. And the list of authors and works is genuinely surprising and revealing. We're not just talking about light reading here.
Not at all.
The sources show her library included heavy hitters like James Joyce's Ulysses, which she was famously photographed reading.
Right, that famous photo.
And Albert Camus' The Fall, works by Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Thomas Wolfe. And a significant collection of Sigmund Freud, including his Letters and Moses and Monotheism.
That collection alone shows a clear interest in psychology and, complex ideas about the human mind and history. But she didn't stop there.
No.
Her library also featured D.H. Lawrence, John Steinbeck, Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desire, Bernard Malamud, and plays by renowned playwrights like Clifford Odets and Sean O'Casey.
And it went even deeper. The sources mention classical philosophy, Aristotle,
metaphysics, theory of poetry and fine art,
and Plato, the philosophy of Plato.
So when you put all of this together, what stands out is a picture of a woman with profound intellectual curiosity and a desire for substance. These aren't casual choices.
Not at all.
They show a serious engagement with literature, philosophy, complex thought. It dramatically contrasts with that simplistic public image.
It really does. And the sources also connect this intellectual depth to her dedication to her craft. Studying method acting under Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York. It wasn't just about learning lines.
No, it was an intense intellectual approach to character. Exactly.
Right.
Her conscious move to New York in, late 54 or early 55, that was a strategic decision to reshape her career, move beyond typecasting, seek more substantive roles, and gain control through her own company, Marilyn Monroe Productions.
Right, her own company.
This reflects significant intellectual ambition and agency that aligns perfectly with the woman building that kind of library.
So this paints a fascinating, really surprising picture of Marilyn's intellectual world. But where do the sources bring Einstein into this world? They found a key detail in that library list.
This is crucial for establishing any potential link, you see. The sources confirm that Marilyn Monroe owned a copy of Albert Einstein's book Out of My Later Years.
So she actually had his work on her shelves.
Yes, and as the sources point out, this absolutely demonstrates an awareness of and an interest in his thoughts and writings.
Okay.
It lends a degree of plausibility to the idea that she might have admired him, not just as, a celebrity scientist, but for his ideas.
And importantly, Out of My Later Years isn't the physics textbook, is it? I mean, it's not even C-squared explained.
No, exactly. It's a collection of his essays, not just on science, but on everything from human rights and pacifism to the role of science in society and even philosophy. So it wasn't necessarily quantum mechanics she was drawn to, but his broader reflections on the world.
Okay, that gives us a window into the type of connection she might have felt and admiration for his mind and his views on life, which again fits this picture of her intellectual curiosity, her desire for life of the mind that the sources highlight.
Precisely.
Her marriage to the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Arthur Miller is another piece of evidence the sources use to show her attraction to intellectual men.
Exactly. So when you look at the woman revealed by her library, her studies, her choices, the voracious reader, the serious student, the woman seeking intellectual partners,
Right.
her simply admiring a brilliant mind like Einstein's becomes entirely consistent with who she was. It makes sense.
So this deep dive into your sources gives us a totally different perspective on Marilyn. But given that, where does the actual story of a potential personal connection, maybe even an intimate one, come from?
Well, that takes us to a key figure mentioned in your sources as the origin point of this specific rumor, Shelly Winters.
Right, Shelly Winters.
She was a one-time roommate and close friend of Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, and her account, detailed in her autobiography, Shelly, also known as Shirley, and in interviews, is the anecdote that, well, launched 1,000 whispers.
It really is. She recounted this famous story from their younger days, back when they were roommates and, she claims, would make lists of men they wanted to sleep with.
Right, the lists.
Winter's list, she said, was full of Hollywood heartthrobs. Typical stuff, maybe?
And Monroe's list
included
Albert Einstein.
Just thinking about that juxtaposition makes you pause, doesn't it?
It really does.
And according to Winters, Marilyn's stated reasons were admiration for his brilliant mind, and she had heard he was very healthy for his age.
That sounds like her.
It's a mix of genuine intellectual respect and classic Marilyn cheekiness.
It absolutely captures her personality as the sources describe it, but the story doesn't end there. Winters claimed that years later, after Monroe's death, she saw something. Something that seemed to corroborate the story.
Right, something that made her wonder if the connection actually happened.
Yeah.
She claimed that at Lee Strasberg's home, where some of Marilyn's belongings were kept for a time, she purportedly saw a photograph of Einstein.
Photograph of Einstein.
And crucially, she claimed it had a personal inscription to Marilyn, one that Winters recalled as being warm and familiar, suggesting, a friendly relationship at least.
Warm and familiar.
Oh.
Okay.
And this is what, according to the sources, led Winters to wonder if Monroe had, in fact, fulfilled her desire to meet and perhaps become intimate with Einstein.
Wow.
This anecdote is certainly compelling, and it's really the foundation upon which the entire rumor seems to rest.
It's a great story, no doubt. But in a deep dive, we don't just tell the story. We verify it against the facts presented in your sources.
Exactly.
So what did they find when they went looking for that alleged photograph?
And their finding is quite definitive. The sources state that despite Winters' confidence, this inscribed photograph remains the single most elusive and unverified piece of the puzzle.
Elusive and unverified. How extensively did the sources indicate researchers looked for it? Did they really dig deep?
Oh, yes. They detail extensive searches. They mention going through auction catalogs from major houses that handled Monroe's effect.
Like Christie's.
Specifically highlighting the landmark Christie's auction in 1999, which was incredibly comprehensive, as well as subsequent sales. And they looked at detailed inventories of Monroe's belongings and archives held at various institutions.
Strasberg's Institute.
Including those at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute.
Yes. And the result. After all that looking.
The conclusion from all these searches is clear. No mention of an Einstein photo, inscribed or otherwise, has ever been found in these records.
Nothing. Wow. What about from Einstein's side? Did they check his archives? Maybe he kept a copy or a note?
Good question, yes. Inquiries were made at the Albert Einstein archives at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
Which has most of his stuff, right?
It holds the vast majority of his papers, letters, and photographs. Their findings. No record of any correspondence or meetings with Marilyn Monroe.
So across multiple extensive searches from both sides, covering auctions, inventories, major archives, the photo Shelly Winters claimed to see, it just isn't there.
It has, according to the sources, never materialized in any public or private collection. It's like a ghost in the archives. There's just no physical proof of its existence found in the records examined.
Okay, so the alleged key piece of evidence seems, well, non-existent based on the sources. But could they have met, even without a photo? Maybe it was just a brief encounter, hard to document. The sources look at the timelines.
Right, and this raises an essential question about logistics. When and where could these two vastly different lives have possibly intersected in a way that would allow for a personal connection?
Tell us about Einstein's life at that time. Based on the sources, what was he up to?
Well, by the late 1940s and early 1950s, when Monroe's career was really taking off, Einstein was in his final years. He died in April 1955, remember?
Right, 55.
He was living quietly in Princeton, New Jersey, primarily focused on his theoretical physics work, particularly the unified field theory.
And his social life. Was he out and about, rubbing shoulders with celebrities? Or more low-key?
Very low-key, relatively speaking. It was, according to the sources, largely composed of fellow academics, physicists, and political activists.
Okay.
While he was a global figure, his day-to-day life was centered on the academic community in Princeton and specific political causes like civil rights and anti-nuclear movements. He wasn't exactly circulating in Hollywood or Broadway glamour circles.
Right. And Marilyn, where was she spending her time during those years, early 50s?
She was, of course, enmeshed in the demanding world of Hollywood, constantly traveling between film sets, promotional events, and the intense social scene of the film industry. Mostly California, then later New York.
So while she did travel to the East Coast, that was later, wasn't it?
Yes, the sources point out this was particularly during her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller, which was 1956 to 1961.
Which was, crucially, after Einstein's death in April 1955.
Precisely. The timeline just doesn't work.
It doesn't add up.
The sources state unequivocally, there are no credible documented accounts from Monroe's or Einstein's biographies, personal calendars, or the press of the time that place them in the same location at the same time.
If you think about the logistics involved, two incredibly famous people, constantly watched, living primarily on opposite coasts.
Mm-hmm.
One focused on theoretical physics in a quiet academic town, the other in the absolute whirlwind of Hollywood and New York celebrity. Does the timing, the location, the context of their lives, as described by the sources, really add up for a secret rendezvous, let alone a friendship?
Based on the systematic investigation presented in the sources looking for the physical evidence, checking the archives, examining the timelines, the answer from a logistical and chronological standpoint is a clear no.
So after going through all the sources you shared, looking at the surprising truth about Marilyn's intellectual life, examining the origin of this compelling story, and investigating the alleged evidence and timelines, what's the final definitive conclusion based only on what was presented in your research?
Well, based on the available evidence presented in your sources, the answer to the question, did Marilyn Monroe sleep with Albert Einstein, is a resounding and definitive no.
A definitive no,
Yeah.
based on the facts in these sources.
Yes. The sources state clearly there is no credible, verifiable proof that Marilyn Monroe and Albert Einstein ever met, corresponded, or had any form of relationship, friendly or otherwise.
None.
The investigation found no support for the rumor, zero.
So if there's no verifiable evidence at all, nothing concrete, why does this story persist? Why is it so captivating to so many people?
This, the sources suggest, reveals more about us and our collective imagination than it does about any real connection between them.
How so?
It's a potent narrative because it pairs the era's ultimate symbols of beauty and intellect in this dramatic, almost paradoxical way. It's just juicy.
It totally taps into that idea we discussed earlier, the hidden depths of a misunderstood icon.
Yeah.
People are fascinated by the idea that Marilyn wasn't just glamour,
Right.
that she had this profound intellectual side and was drawn to brilliant minds.
And it combines that with the universal allure of a brilliant mind. The idea of Einstein, the ultimate genius, having this unexpected human, perhaps even romantic connection is inherently intriguing. It humanizes him in an unexpected way.
So the story reveals more about our enduring fascination with these two legendary figures than it does about any real-life connection between them. It says more about us.
Exactly. And where does the story come from, again, ultimately? The sources bring it right back to that specific anecdote.
From Shelly Winters.
Right, resting almost entirely on the uncorroborated, albeit compelling anecdote of Shelly Winters.
Uncorroborated being the key word there.
Absolutely. Her memory, while perhaps fond, could be, as the sources gently put it, perhaps embellished. A fascinating tale that really captured the public imagination, but one not supported by the facts unearthed in your sources.
Well, that was a real deep dive into a captivating myth. We took the sources you shared, uncovered the surprising truth about Marilyn Monroe's intellectual life that often gets overlooked.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Totally. And we investigated a pervasive historical rumor rooted in a compelling anecdote and found that, based on the available evidence presented here, it simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
No, it doesn't.
It's a powerful reminder of how stories take hold, isn't it?
It certainly is. Thinking about this, it makes you wonder, how do compelling personal stories or anecdotes, even when there's no hard evidence, manage to become such a persistent part of our collective memory or even sometimes historical narrative?
That's a great question. It really makes you consider, in a world flooded with information and compelling tales, how important is it for us, for you listening, to consciously distinguish between an intriguing possibility or a great story and actual documented facts?
It raises an important question for anyone trying to understand history or public perception. How do we sift through the stories, the legends, and find the verifiable truth underneath? What's our process for that?
Absolutely, something to think about. Thank you for sharing these sources and taking this deep dive with us. It was really illuminating.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining this exploration, everyone.